Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our DE&I Next Practices Now call. We started off this morning with a beautiful song, Freedom by Batiste. Also got to catch a beautiful performance of that at the Grammys recently. So hope you are all enjoying that beautiful song that was picked by our speakers today. As you come in, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to hear where you're calling in from, where you're working from. And throughout this meeting today, please feel free to just go ahead and share your questions in the chat. We love to keep these meetings interactive and engaging. So we want to hear from you in the chat. See some people calling in from Chicago, Richland, all over the place. And then I think our next slide is going to be coming up really shortly here. Perfect. So we love to start these meetings with our favorite quotes, and our speakers today have picked this beautiful quote by Batiste. The reason we get down is to get back up. I know we'll dive into that a little bit more later, but such a beautiful quote. And we can move to that next slide. And we always want to welcome all of our members on the call. Our membership here at I4C just continues to grow with some fantastic logos, some amazing organizations that really build the strength of our community here. If you're not a member yet, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to welcome you into membership. And we're really excited to give our members here a quick preview into the talent imperative research that we've been doing. We partnered with Fortune magazine to better understand the talent imperative and how companies are responding to the hyper-competitive talent market. So you can go ahead and go over to i4cp.com and get a quick preview of that research. And I know Eric will dive into that a little bit more later on in the call. With that, I want to introduce our call facilitators, Eric Davis, who's our creative director and senior editor here at I4CP, and Jackie Robertson, who is the chair of our CDO board and has recently transitioned into a new position as well. So I also want to remind everyone of our upcoming DE&I Next Practice calls. We have changed our schedule a little bit, so make sure that you're registered for our series. Our next one is coming up on June 2nd. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our facilitator, Jackie Robertson.
All right. Thank you, Nina. Good morning, everyone. I have a lot on my head and a lot on my heart. As Nina said, I transitioned into a new role. I'm currently with a clinic, 30 days in, learning a lot. I have a few things I want to share with all of you today. You know, we all know the definition of insanity, right? It's doing the same thing over again and expecting a different result. So I recently had this aha moment. I reviewed several DE&I frameworks, a lot of them focused on the pillars we're familiar with, including workforce, workplace, marketplace, community. There are some variations, but these are typically the main pillars. Workforce, denoting strategies around sourcing, recruitment, and development of talent. Workplace, denoting strategies around the organization's culture and addressing gaps in engagement and or how talent experiences that culture. Marketplace or community, and that typically denotes clients, communities, diverse suppliers, you know, the entities we serve externally to the organization. But let's talk about community for a minute. A lot of organizations sponsor philanthropic efforts. They raise up disenfranchised members of their communities. And this could include, and often does include, financial support for high schools, colleges, partnerships, nonprofit organizations, focus on providing pathways, mentoring, etc. for students. And all of this to create equitable pathways for students to intern or work at our organizations. So now this all sounds reasonable, right? So what's been the impact? Many organizations quote year-over-year improvement in their diversity numbers internally and improvement in the monies allocated for philanthropic efforts towards disenfranchised. A lot of organizations pledge to improve their diversity numbers year by year. And although billions of dollars were pledged, only millions of dollars were realized. Just about every company can boast some improvement. Yet throughout all of these efforts, the disparities in health, social justice, economics, etc., continue to reveal we have not made much of a difference in the last 30 years. So how can this be, you ask? We're throwing money at the problem. It should work, right? We're training our hiring managers not to be biased. It should work, right? We should have no issue in hiring women and diverse talent, right? So I walked into one of the big box pet stores, and I can never go in and just get a leash or a beef bone for my dog. I always like to take the stroll to look at the pets for sale in the cages. And I don't know why I do this. It never makes me feel better to see the animals in cages. I always expect to see fewer animals, and I hope this means that they've all found a good home. So I walked down the aisle, I saw the ferrets, I saw the hamsters, the guinea pigs, and one little hamster caught my attention. He was running on the little Ferris wheel-like structure, and I stopped to watch him for a minute. He wasn't fazed. He continued to run on this little wheel, his feet moving, his little fat body at rates that defied the physics of his build. Yet he continued to run, going nowhere. And I wondered, what must he be thinking? I wonder if he likes this, or if he continues to run, maybe he thinks he'll break free of the cage. I don't know. But I'm reminded again of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So my aha moment has nothing to do with hamsters per se, but I began to wonder about my own intelligence, because I've been running on this human hamster wheel for years, and I can't honestly say that as a DE&I leader that my role is no longer needed. Remember, that's what all of us say, right? Our definition of success is when the role of DE&I practitioners is no longer needed. I'm not sure what's going on, but organizations have placed a higher priority on the demand for DE&I practitioners. So who's really on the hamster wheel? I'm not suggesting by any means that all of you have not made meaningful strides. We all have. You have, and we have, but here's the facts. And so what is the source of all of this data? What is the root cause? So organizations have these mentoring programs for underrepresented minorities. They've attempted to level the playing field. They reinstate the Rooney Rule. They ensure we've got diverse slates. They hold leaders accountable. They provide incentives for inclusive leaders who are getting it right in their departments and teams. So as our young kids would say on the long road trips, are we there yet? And why aren't we there yet? I have one word for you: segregation. Dr. David Williams from Harvard wrote this insightful article. He wrote it years ago, but it's still so relevant today. And he states that racial residential segregation is the cornerstone on which Black and white disparities in health status have been built in the US. That's so important. I'm going to read that again. He states that racial residential segregation is the cornerstone on which Black-white disparities in health status have been built in the US. Segregation is the fundamental cause of differences in health status between African Americans and whites, because it shapes socioeconomic conditions for Blacks, not only at the individual and household levels, but also for the neighborhood and the community levels. And evidence suggests that segregation is a key determinant of racial differences in socioeconomic mobility, and additionally, it can create social and physical risk in residential environments that adversely affect health. Segregation, as you know, refers to a physical segregation of races in residential contexts. It was imposed by legislation. We all know this. It was supported by major economic institutions. It was enshrined in the housing policies of federal government, enforced by the judicial system, and legitimized by the ideology of white supremacy that was advocated by churches and other cultural institutions. And these policies, combined with the efforts of vigilant neighborhood organizations, discrimination on the part of real estate agents, home sellers, restrictive covenants to limit the housing options of Black Americans to the least desirable residential areas. The segregation of African Americans is distinctive. Although most immigrant groups have experienced some residential segregation in the United States, no immigrant group has ever lived under the high levels of segregation that currently exist for the African American population. Compared to schools in the middle class areas, segregated schools have lower than average test scores. So we solve these issues by engaging mentors in some instances for disadvantaged youth. That'll help, right? Makes us feel good, like we've truly begun to solve all these societal ills. So racial residential segregation leads to racial differences in high school dropout and graduation rates, competencies and knowledge of high school graduates, preparation for higher education. We all know this, right? And yet our organizational leaders will say, we want diversity, but we can't find them. You think? And the band played on. Long-term exposure to conditions of concentrated poverty can undermine strong work ethics. It can devalue academic success and remove the social stigma of imprisonment as well as educational and economic failure. Oh, there's a real surprise. Racial differences in wealth also link the current situation to Blacks to historic processes of segregation. For most American families, housing equity is a major source of wealth. Segregation in neighborhood and housing equality, disinvestment, it just goes on and on. Research also reveals the socioeconomic characteristics and segregation levels of particular areas can lead to dramatic variations in factors conducive to the practice of healthy and unhealthy behaviors. Let's talk about eating for a minute. We all know that eating nutritious foods is positively associated with their availability, and the availability of healthful products in grocery stores varies across the countries as well as zip codes. Therefore, the high cost and poor quality of grocery items in segregated neighborhoods can lead to poor nutrition. Tobacco and alcohol use are coping strategies that are frequently employed to obtain escape and relief from the personal suffering and the deprivation that characterizes many disadvantaged environments. You know, I'm getting visions of this hamster on the wheel all over again. I don't know about you. The research goes on and on and on. And not surprisingly, residents of more economically deprived neighborhoods had shorter lifespans. They've had higher body mass indexes, larger waist circumferences. I mean, the list goes on. The pattern exists across a broad range of medical procedures, and so healthcare is impacted as well. And in conclusion, Dr. Williams goes on to talk about it is a widely recognized that a pervasive and persistent pattern of these racial disparities across all of these indicators of health status is determined by, obviously, there's no silver bullet, it's very complex. And he calls it these spiders, and it's responsible for creating the web in the first place. The evidence reviewed suggested that racial residential segregation is an institutional manifestation of racism, and it's one of the most important spiders responsible for persisting Black and white equalities in health. What's so intriguing, this study was done over 2 decades ago, and not much has changed. So the effective efforts to reduce these racial disparities in health status should seriously grapple with reducing the racial disparities in socioeconomic circumstances with targeted interventions, not only at the individual level, but at the geographic level in terms of where these folks live. So now you've heard what I'm sure comes as no surprise to you. Are your D&I strategies focused on the sources of the disparities in health and wealth? I submit to you, if you're not dealing with segregation in all its forms, housing, health, wealth, we're going to be having the same conversation 5, 10, 20 years from now. So what is your organization prepared to do to address these disparities at their source? What are you prepared to do? Should we be shifting the conversation to focus less on the important initiatives and more on the critical roots of social and economic ills that continue to plague our communities? You know, it's something to think about later when you're taking a walk, you know, that afternoon walk, or for those of you who prefer to walk indoors, something to think about while you're walking on that treadmill or riding your Peloton. Certainly our stationary bikes, treadmills, rollers, all make us feel better for sure. And it's similar to writing a check to help out underrepresented minorities in the community. What a lift of all of our consciences to know we've done our part to help the diversity efforts in our communities. I'm not judging. I'm simply asking all of you, and I include myself in this too, to think about the wisdom of our D&I strategies while we're walking fast and maybe, just maybe, going nowhere. I thank you for indulging me today. I had a lot on my head, a lot on my heart. I've recently transitioned into healthcare, and it is just daunting, the work that we have ahead of us. I think the quotes were just so spot on today by our speakers. I can't wait to get into a wonderful dialogue with both of our speakers today. Cheryl Kern, who is the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at MillerKnoll, and her colleague, Charles Motley, who is the VP of Operations at MillerKnoll. And so I am going to start by saying to both of you, what's top of mind for each of you today? Talk to us.
Sure, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll be brief for the sake of time. I selected that song. Hopefully a lot of you got to see that phenomenal performance by John Batiste at the Grammys on Sunday. He was phenomenal. But the quote that was in the song about we get down so we can get back up, I think it resonates not only with what Jackie just shared with us in those comments she gave, but it's also a reminder of the significantly important work that we're doing as DE&I leaders. We're down so much of the time because of the issues that we're dealing with, but you have to be specially wired to be committed to doing this kind of work. And I think that we all get energized and we get right back up. What also was on my mind is the fact that this is Autism Awareness Month. The UN sanctioned it, and it was on April the 2nd. And as we think about looking through the lens of all the different people and issues that bring us down, there's 75 million people around the world that actually have some autistic characteristic. And we can't forget about how many people need us to be dedicated and committed to this work. And so that quote was really around making sure that we remember that we're engaged around this work, that people need us, and that we have to continually get up. Ukraine is another example. We have to get up and always be here to be innovative and to move forward for the people.
That is so well said, Cheryl. Thank you for that. And thank you for grounding us in just some of the realities of today, both from kids or children with autism, individuals with autism, what is going on in Ukraine today. Thank you for grounding us in that. I don't know how many people in the audience are familiar with MillerKnoll, but for those of us who are not familiar, can you tell us just a little bit more about it? And I'll direct that, Cheryl, to you or to Charles.
Charles.
Okay. So MillerKnoll used to be Herman Miller. And we purchased Knoll in August of last year. So we changed our name to MillerKnoll. Now we're probably the largest retail manufacturer in the world. We're all over the world: China, Europe, Italy, United States, Mexico, South America. So our bandwidth is very big. We do healthcare, furniture. You guys talk about healthcare. So we fill up hospitals. We do retail furniture. A lot of our furniture is nostalgic, been in movies over the years. So if you go back in 70 movies and in 80 movies, you'll see a lot of our nostalgic furniture that still sells today. You'd be shocked that it still sells today. We're a design company who manufactures phenomenal parts. I think that's the best way to describe it. I mean, we want to give our customers the best experience in the products that we give them. And we want to be the leader in that. So that's a quick Cliff Note version, I think, of what we are.
I love it. I love it. And, one of the things, and I've purchased furniture from your organization before, and one of the things that I noticed and I appreciate about it, the designs are funky, yes, but the chairs are ergonomically correct. So from a health standpoint, I've been very impressed. So that's just my brief commercial on behalf of MillerKnoll. I do love your products. But, one of the things that is just intriguing, so never mind the fact that both of you are relatively new to your roles. One of the things that's intriguing is this unlikely partnership of DE&I and operations. And maybe I shouldn't say unlikely, and we need to ask the audience later how many of their organizations have this partnership. But can you talk to me about this? So how did this come about? Cheryl, how did you and Charles become partners in this to move your diversity, equity, and inclusion journey forward? And how does a partnership with operations enhance your ability to do that?
Yeah, and I'd love Charles to chime in as well. I think that we both arrived at similar times, both with similar desires to have a partnership. So I think it always starts with a willing partner. I have to say that we're also extremely fortunate beyond our CEO, Andy Owen, and the support that she gives us, that our leader of all of global manufacturing is also someone, I'll just share a simple example with you. He's also someone, when I arrived, that had already put a procedure in place that said every single employee on the manufacturing floor globally would be gifted 4 hours a month to be involved in any DE&I activity that they wanted, and that would not be taken out of their work hours. It was the gift of time. And so he established that. And then he holds us accountable for tracking against a goal that he has of what percentage of his population actually participates. So when you've got that kind of support from the top, it makes partnerships like ours more likely. So Charles, I'll turn it over to you.
I agree. I think, fundamentally, I think we have to be very transparent. Operations is the biggest cultural core of any organization. If you're in a manufacturing organization, your operations, it has the biggest area of diversity. It has the biggest opportunities for people to see growth, believe growth's not there, or even have a sense of isolation because they look at the top and they see the same picture. So I think it's critical that from an operational standpoint, you don't see a ton of diversity in operations, which is, part of, I think, what makes our relationship key. Because people have to know, people leave companies because they don't see the clouds.
Right.
They see the smog. And so we have to, as leaders, drive that opportunity to get every employee, women, people of color, Hispanics, Asians, everyone, that opportunity to see those clouds. And I think that's what makes the partnership with Cheryl truly, and we drive that every day. So it's not talk, it's not lip service. You got to be invested, you got to be engaged, and that's the way you influence. So, and I think, we do that at a high level.
I love that, and thank you for that. I guess one of the things I just want to probe a little bit more on is when I think of operations, Charles, I think of, an organization has a vision, or Cheryl has this DE&I vision. And as an operations leader, you are helping her to actualize that strategy. Is that how you and Cheryl work together? When I think of operations, I think of people who are actually operationalizing or activating a strategy. Can you help this audience understand, is that how you work together? I think this relationship is powerful. And I really want to understand the benefits of it, because maybe it's a model that other companies will start to adopt.
Well, I think it's key. I think, what we do is we put discipline in the process. Now, I'll tell you from an operational standpoint, every company has tons of jobs. Every company, this is the great resignation time. So everybody's hiring, trying to find people. I think one of the things we challenge is, okay, if you want to go interview 6 white males, you got to go interview 6 diversity candidates. I want to see the pool. So it's not a issue of, because the first thing, it's not about getting a position, it's about getting in the room. And we drive that. And I think Cheryl is a pillar of, how are we getting people in the room? How are we getting the value add of our diversity candidates into the room to get looked at? And I think that's what operations can help. Because when you look at the footprint, we have the biggest gap of employees. If we got 11,000 employees, 8,500 of them probably are in operations across the world. So we can drive that. How are we developing our diversity in those organizations? Example would be, we never had a director woman in a role until this year. I hired one. But people won't believe they can become something they don't see. We mimic what we see, and we believe what's available by what we see is available at levels. When we talk about career growth, I think Cheryl, pushes that not only in operations, but throughout the total organization. I don't want to, Cheryl, you might have a thought to that, but that's what I would say. From operationally, we can make the biggest impact. We have the biggest pool of people. We're the most diverse, of most of the groups in our organization. So our ability to drive change is huge. And again, we have to push it. And it's a discipline, because people, the sad thing about diversity is, typically when you sit in a room and you go to a diversity meeting, the people that we're talking to understand diversity. The room we need to be in is the ones that don't understand it. And that's the role that I get an opportunity to be in, because I get to sit in that room and talk to the folks who maybe don't understand the importance of it and don't understand the world, because we're in a diversity world. So the world mimics what we are today. It's not the world that it was 30 years ago. So that'd be my thought.
Jackie, if I could I love your question around activation. And I always appreciated about you that you very much like to move from the conceptual to like, how do we actually make this happen? So I always love it when you take us there. I'll share with you all just one example of what Charles is talking about. I think we came together and very quickly said, where can we take action? And through a joint effort between DE&I, our talent organization, and ops, as well as sales, we formed a committee, and we meet every 2 weeks, and we're trying to take a look at what do we need to do, to Charles's point, to pull into that pipeline, irregardless of where the roles may sit. And so this group is currently focusing on creating a brand new future viewing kind of centered toolkit to help managers as they think about, especially looking at diverse talent and bringing in diverse talent. There's a whole series of things that group is focused on, but that's one activation point that we really have been centered on. We've been hit with a labor shortage, just like a lot of other companies. And we were asked as HR to play a role in reshaping how we are represented in the broader communities, because right now a lot of people don't know who we are. And so there was a labor shortage task team that was launched. And between Charles's efforts, someone from my team's efforts, we've completely kind of reimagined what it's going to take to attract diverse talent to the company. So those are two, and I would say, and Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we ended up, I don't know the diversity numbers, the latest ones, but I know late last year, we had ended up bringing in like 300 people just through that labor shortage outreach effort. And we had high diversity numbers. The numbers continue to change and to grow. But those are two activation examples, Jackie, of how we tangibly have gotten down to the work.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for that, Cheryl. And it also reinforces, Charles, what you said about bringing a level of discipline to this process with that operations lens, because without the discipline, activation is going to be very difficult. And Cheryl, you are really bringing up this whole notion of the talent imperative today. And I'm going to have my colleague, Eric, talk about this in a minute, but I want to be respectful of the audience, and I want to just take a minute and ask Nina, do we have any questions or comments, Nina, in the chat before we turn it over to Eric?
No, I think everyone's actually just so engaged in wanting to hear from Charles and Cheryl right now. But I did share the question to the audience. We'd love to hear in the chat how DE&I partners with operations. So we'd love to just see some responses from everyone around that. And that can maybe drive some more of our conversation together.
Yeah, absolutely. And so while you all are thinking about that in the audience, because I am curious about, does anyone else have this kind of model, you know, where there's this close partnership between DE&I and operations? You know, the partnerships that I'm familiar with is DE&I partnering very closely with all of the segments along the talent management continuum, whether that's talent acquisition, learning and development, you know, compensation, et cetera. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Continue to say that I'm intrigued about this model, Cheryl and Charles. Definitely want to continue to follow your journey. But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Eric, talk to us about, what is going on with this whole talent imperative. Where are we with that? Where are we with the study? Talk to this audience about that, if you would.
Okay, well, thanks, Jackie. Hi, everyone. So the talent imperative, this is a study that we did recently in partnership with Fortune Magazine. We wrapped up the study early last month. We have a brief of early findings out there, and we're working on the analysis for our final findings. But we had about 1,195 respondents to it. We had 635 from large organizations with 1,000 or more employers. And we had about 77 countries represented in the study. And what we were looking for was what, with the Great Resignation, as it's been dubbed, or the Great Reshuffle, what is it that organizations are doing to attract and retain their talent? How are they addressing it? How are they addressing it through budgets? How are they addressing it through accountability? Just looking at all kinds of factors around that. So, by the way, if anybody's interested in seeing that brief, it's a public brief right now of the initial findings. I think we can put a link to that in chat for anybody who wants to take a look at it. But there was one finding from that in particular that I just thought we could touch on that really addresses what Charles and Cheryl have been talking about with us here. And let's see if we can go to the next slide. What we asked about was, given the competitive talent market, what elements of the employee value proposition are most important for your organization to offer in the coming year? And by the way, this study had some really fabulous findings for DE&I practitioners just all around. I'll talk about a couple more, but so the first thing we found was that flexibility in work arrangements, unsurprisingly, seeing as where we are with the talent market right now, was our number one factor. But number two was commitment to diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And we also found that compared to any of the other factors that are on this list, both high there, we had a very large gap between high performance organizations focusing on this compared to lower performance organizations. So that means that it's really going to be considered a big value add to organizations to pump up their commitment there. And some of the ways that we're seeing that organizations were actually operationalizing that commitment, we saw that about 55% of organizations were boosting their budget for DE&I in the coming year. That was number two only to talent acquisition. And unlike talent acquisition, it didn't really matter what performance level by our categories that we break it down by that the organization was in. Basically, all of them were raising somewhere around 55% their budgets for DE&I. Another great finding we found was that accountability for, well, just to go back to the budget part, as Jackie said earlier, just throwing money at things isn't always what's working. We need to also operationalize things. So we also ask about accountability for DE&I in the organization. And one of the great things I found was that high performance organizations are definitely putting more focus on accountability, and they're doing it at the frontline and middle management levels. And what I liked is that it's just not a tie to compensation, which is good to have at certain levels, but at the same time, it's about who they're promoting and who's going to be considered for moving up in the organization. So if you're not showing inclusive behaviors and showing a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in those organizations, you're just not moving up in the organization at the same level. So I think that's where, the rubber kind of meets the road a little bit more and how that's going to play into the employee value propositions. Some of the other things we saw in this was that, the purpose and mission of the organization was also one of the top 3 factors. Organizational development opportunities, career advancement opportunities, and internal development. Those were all factors that high performance organizations were focusing on more. And the fact that they're combining that with their commitment to diversity, inclusion, and belonging, I think could make a big impact in some of the systemic problems in organizations when it comes to moving diversity up through tiers in the organization. So I think that's about all I had to share on that. But I did want to see for Cheryl and Charles, do you see commitment to DE&I as a major element of the employee value proposition at MillerKnoll? And how does that play out when you're both looking for talent and trying to retain talent?
I'll let Charles go first.
I think, yeah, I think the key word for me is it deliberate? Are we, with what we're doing, deliberate? So as we look to bring people in, it's as much about bringing people in, but we got to keep them, because, and that's, we talked a little bit about it in our meeting before this meeting, but I think you have to have some intentional connectivity with people. You just can't bring them in and say, okay, we got diversity candidates, but what are we doing in the company to make them feel connected to the company? And if you have a strain there, you're going to lose them anyway. So you do all that work to get them in, give them a great salary, great benefits, great office, but you don't have any connectivity to them. And then they feel isolated. And over time, the work performance goes down and they start looking for other jobs. So I think it's a twofold process that we have to be deliberate through all the phases to make it work. But the commitment is there. You see it. The people. We've probably brought in more women and more minorities into the company over the last 6 months than we have probably in the last 4 years. Mm-hmm. But we still got to drive that connectivity, because as we bring them in, we got to make sure that they have the tools to feel that they're part of an organization. So I think, that's part of what I see is a step that we're getting stronger at, and we're doing a lot of that. And Cheryl, in our two bi-weekly meetings, she drives a lot of that conversation and what are we doing? So she gives us a lot of assignments, let me say it that way, come back and show what we're doing, how we're executing. We have a lot of table meetings with teams and with groups. And I think that gives people an opportunity to share a voice, to share concerns. And again, that's what it is, and I think we have to get more inclined with that, because the world is still a little different. I think we can all acknowledge that. But I think our ability to drive some of the things, the preempt things that make people grow and achieve in organizations are the things that we're trying to do at MillerKnoll.
I think it's great that you brought up those table meetings and those opportunities to interact. On this chart here, we have coaching and mentoring from leaders as one of those kind of connectivity points that we found was really vital. We've seen this in several of our other studies, and it's mostly something where we see a lot of high performance organizations doing it, not as many low performers, and it's not really picked up by the majority. So it's something that we call next practice, where the ability to interact with leaders like that just creates a bond with new talent that is very sticky for keeping them with the organization and very important for retention. So it's really great to hear that you're making those opportunities at MillerKnoll.
And I think the challenge that we all have to be real is that COVID slowed us down. So we forced people to work remote and to get comfortable in that isolation and not feel connected, doing Teams calls and looking at faces on screen. So now we're getting back to a normalcy where it's really important right now, because there's some people who've lived in isolation for 1.5 years, and now we got to pull them in, because this is the most critical time for a lot of organizations, as we talk about the great resignation, as everybody talks about. But I think it's important that we come out of the COVID stretch and now drive a lot of that intentional connectivity at a high level, because if those things are not deliberate, companies will see, people leaving, and then their turnover will be high because they didn't do the things it's not just a job. I always tell people it's not just a job. And if you come in with that attitude, you're not going to connect with the people. So
yeah, I just want to give a voice of also reasonableness to everything that we're saying. I don't want to convey in any kind of way that we've got it all figured out, that the sun shines brighter on the side of the street that MillerKnoll sits on. That is definitely not the case. We still got a lot of work to do, and we recognize that. To your question about being deliberate, though, Eric, another step that we've taken to nudge leaders along that aren't quite on board and getting it is that our CEO and our board recently put in place, our full leadership team, our first ever compensation incentives for directors and above in the company. And so, it takes a lot of different approaches to get buy-in. And so we're hopeful that this is yet another way to nudge leaders along so that they begin to get it if they can't get it the other way, right?
So
Yeah,
I'm all over this one.
I think we've got a question from the audience that kind of relates to this from Carly Thomas. She's a practitioner who sits within her company's global operations, and she creates and executes on their DE&I strategy. And she is curious, and maybe she can come off mute here, on how you balance operations focus on numbers with wanting to progress on inclusion matters as well.
And Carly
Charles,
here, I'm
that's
happy
definitely
to,
you.
because Carly here, I'm happy to explain further. But again, I used to work actually in furniture and your competitors. So, but now I'm in technology and working in global ops and not sitting on corporate D&I. And I understand operations is about metrics and numbers. However, I don't want us to focus solely on, okay, what's that representation? Because we lose what's that qualitative experience and story that happens when people are here. But then again, we have ops people who are used to data and numbers. So I wanted to hear both of your perspectives, kind of knowing that and how you balance it.
Well, for me, I think, in the role that I have, subjectively, the numbers is not as important for me because I think the experiences and how are you driving it. I mean, if the mindset is that we want to put the best people in roles and we want to have, and the best people, we have diversity pools. So my intent is to make sure that we acknowledge all the pool every time. Again, if we want to interview 6 white males, we have to interview 6 diversity candidates. And if we can't find, and we won't make a decision until we interview 6 diversity candidates. So the pressure sometimes comes, we can't find any, and we don't have, we can't, they're not out there. Well, go look for them, and we'll make the decision. So, and that's painful. We take some operational hits because we don't fill those roles just yet. But again, you got to have some discipline to the process. And once people understand that that's the process, it'll work fine over time. But I think, point taken. A lot of times you look at the numbers and say we're doing a great job, but you can look at what you brought in from a diversity standpoint, but then I'll say, well, what left? And why did they leave? And what happened there? Again, is it a comfort level, not just getting people the opportunity, but making them comfortable in the organization? That would be my response. I'm not sure if I answered your question completely, but that would kind of be my thought on that.
And for us, the experience piece that Charles spoke to, the employee experience piece, is paramount right now because we are still midpoint on our journey. And so we can't just hang a set of metrics up and say we are at world-class levels, and we're okay with that. But what we can do is to create an environment and an experience that seeks to honor and to be inclusive of all of our people and not have any of them in any areas feel like they are less than and that they're the outsider, which often can happen with manufacturing and ops. So we have been very intentionally focused on the experience and think that that's going to help us to drive the desired outcomes that we want in the future.
So I got another question here. And this is, can you ask Cheryl to touch more on the compensation strategy? What are your outcome metrics? You know, we've all heard, you know, what gets measured gets done, but then there's the corollary to that, what gets rewarded gets repeated. So,
Yeah.
and one of the things that we really learned also in this study, and something we've been talking about with our Chief Diversity Officer working group that we have at I4CP, is, all right, if we're going to hold people accountable, are we teaching them how to get to the goals that we want them to get to? Are we telling them everything they need to know to be competent when we say that they're going to have these DE&I goals?
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit more about that?
Yep, and I'll be very brief. And so let me give you a little bit of context. So I've been here a little bit over a year. So for 2 years ago, we launched our first corporate scorecard that had DEI elements in it. So that set us on the track to now regularly monitoring our DE&I performance. This embedding them now into not only the corporate scorecard, but into the incentive piece was what we felt was the next step forward on our journey. And so just to give you an example of one that would be in there, it would be looking at what our diverse leadership representation is. That one really matters a lot. It gets back to what Charles was talking about with the pipeline. That would be one that there would be some element of incentive that's tied to that for anybody I said that is a director and above. The second piece of, that's just one, there's multiple ones. The second piece, and that was approved by the board, that had to go to the board to be approved. The second piece of your question is around what are we doing to make sure that we can drive those desired behaviors that get us the outcomes that we want. We're embarked right now in an all company-wide behavioral-based experiential learning opportunity that encompasses ops and everyone, not just leaders, with the notion that our employees are also going to help to sharpen the saw and to make the leaders better. And they're going to also play a role in holding leaders accountable. That's the workforce that we're in right now. That's the world of work. But yes, we bring them those tools and those experiential learning opportunities to help to shape the behaviors.
And to add to that, I mean, each plant is required to drive, support, document equity groups in their plants. So that's part of that compensation goal when you look at, okay, how many equity groups do you have in the plant? What's the percentage of, you know, you got 500 people, you know, is 20% of those folks in equity groups, and are we driving that? So I think that's, you see that too as a push that traditionally was not there. So I think that would be something else I would add.
We have a question from the audience around the partnerships that you've established to develop that talent pipeline. Are you focused on college recruiting? Do you have other professional organizations that you have partnerships with?
We do. Charles, did you want to start? Because I know that there's some things that I think I have some DE&I ones I can speak to, but Charles may be able to speak to some of the focus around ops, which I think might be a little bit different as we're doing that intentional outreach and trying to partner.
Well, I think we look at, you know, the schools when we want to bring in talent. We're going to schools. We're talking to a lot of the schools. Cheryl team has helped us where, I mean, we even partner with, you know, companies around the area who are, you know, we're sharing opportunities, they're sharing opportunities. So we understand what works. We have different organizations that we all are driving. My counterpart, Francisco, he drives a Hispanic organization that's doing a phenomenal job in Western Michigan, outreach that has been amazing over the last year, I think, which is critical as we look. So I think we're doing a lot of things to make the awareness. I think that's the first piece. You know, we're making the awareness, we're making people understand it's a part of our DNA. Is what we're going to be, and it's how we're going to move going forward. And I think that's more of the challenge right now for us that I see from an operational standpoint, because it is still some cultural biases that you have to break. But again, as you pattern that and get people aligned, it's becoming part of what we have to be as we move forward. So.
All right. Well, listen, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to the audience members for really engaging in this conversation. Cheryl and Charles, I can tell that there is some sincere interest out there, and especially around, you know, the model that you all are partnering in to move your agenda forward and to execute on that agenda. Certainly, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more questions. Felicia Sanders wants to follow up with you, Cheryl, on this vendor partnership, as well as how do we compensate our leaders for doing this in a way that the organization doesn't feel that we are compensating them for counting heads versus making those heads count? How do you strike that balance? And so I have one final question for you, if there are no other questions from the audience, and then I'm going to turn it over to Eric to wrap up. You talk about transparency in what you're doing and getting talent in the door. I'm interested in some of the non-believers. What must they be thinking if they're seeing all of this diverse talent coming in? Do they visualize this as a zero-sum game, that the pie is somehow smaller? What kind of change management efforts do you have going on at the middle levels? Because obviously your senior levels are clearly committed and engaged. But what kind of change management is needed at those lower levels and mid levels for those non-believers to understand why is all this diverse talent coming in the door? What does that mean for me, my job, etc.? How do you respond to that?
So I'll go. I think one, the market is competitive. So I don't think it, you know, it's not an impact, I think, to a person's role per se. I think it's more of, are you getting, so when you look at operations, I'll be real quick, and you look at the shop floor, it's a melting pot. And our ability to go, so the people look at who are the leaders? Who are the leaders that drive that? We have so many opportunities to develop people from the shop up to become leaders in the organization. A lot of people won't engage those opportunities simply because they don't see people in the leadership roles. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the change management shift. You know, we want, you know, we can't go find, if we can't find them outside of the company, why can't we develop them? But we can't develop them if they don't believe those opportunities exist. And I think that's part of that change management. We have to look within, because, you know, our strongest talent should be from within. You know, the best companies replace, if I left today, my replacement should be on my staff. So I think we do that more now. And I think that's how you drive it, because it is some pushback. Why do we have to do it? Why does it make it important? But the reality of it is, it makes it important because our resources are great internal. And as we drive that, I think, you know, and they understand that, and they got to get some wins. You know, all of them are not wins, I mean, but they got to get the wins. And I think across the board, we're seeing a lot more wins than we are losses. So I think it helps to send that message. And, you know, I think it's a culture change. I think I'm in Western Michigan, so I would tell you it's a challenge, but it has been a good journey. So I think, you know, that helps get the team in the right direction.
I would just add, Jackie, that you guys know this as well as anybody. We're not doing this work alone and in a silo. It takes a strong contingency of HRBPs to also help to coach those that don't quite get it and don't want to get it. And some may never get it, but they still keep trying. We've got a fairly new HRLT, our HR leadership team, and they are phenomenal partners, advocates in supporting this. And that makes the work even, I guess, easier would be the word that I would use, more manageable.
I appreciate that. You know, as I kind of wrap up, I just want to say I admire the partnership that the two of you have. I admire the humility you demonstrate along your journey, and certainly hope that you will come back again and engage us more in the future. So just thank you so much for being here, for being our guest speakers today. Just really appreciate you. So thank you. I'm going to
Thank
turn
you,
it over
Jackie.
to Eric at this point, who is going to wrap up and tell you about some of our future guest speakers and some of the current work that is going on that you can engage in.
Thank you, Jackie. So I actually have a pretty quick wrap up. So I just wanted to ask Cheryl one more question. We got this from Felicia Sanders in chat. And can you share just a quick tidbit about your vendor partnership that you mentioned earlier? Just maybe let people know who you're working with and what you're doing.
Yep. So we're working with NLI, which I know many of your organizations may already be working with them. And this year, so this is the second year, our second phase of behavioral based. So it moves beyond just bias and psychological safety. But this year, we're really focused on what does each individual need in order to truly be involved and engaged and to feel like they can help to drive that teamwork, that sense of inclusion. And so for us, it's going to be a full year effort. It's my single biggest investment in DE&I this year from a budget standpoint, and it's global.
Great, thanks for sharing that. All right, so just wanted to share that our next DE&I Next Practice call will be on 6/2. Our guest will be Beck Bailey, who's Managing Director of Inclusion and Diversity at Accenture. And we will, to go along with the Pride Month theme, be talking about how Accenture identifies with she, him, and they in their organizations. Just for a little background, when I was looking into him, Beck Bailey was also spent a good bit of time at the Human Rights Campaign Foundation, which, as we know, is a big human rights organizations dealing with LGBTQ plus issues. So we should be a great guest and we should have a great hour with him. Otherwise, I just want to thank everyone for joining the call today. Thank Charles and Cheryl for being wonderful guests and sharing all the great information about what they've been doing and the partnership and operations there at MillerKnoll. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, audience.
Thank you, everybody.
All right.